is your commanding officer?
Is it haunted?
Confederate Brigadier General Henry Hopkins Sibley envisioned that he would invade New Mexico with his army, defeat the Union forces, capture the capital city of Santa Fe, and then march westward to conquer California and add it to the territory of the Confederacy. Sibley's first step was to gather an army in El Paso, Texas, and lead it north along the Rio Grande, with the objective of capturing Fort Craig and the supplies in the fort, and defeating the Federal Army under Colonel Edward Canby. On January 3, 1862, Sibley left El Paso with 3 regiments and 1 partial regiment of mounted Texans, comprising 2,510 officers and men. Fort Craig, 140 miles north of El Paso, was the major obstacle in his path. Canby waited for him there with 3,800 men, of which most were infantry. Only 1,200 of Canby's men were seasoned soldiers. The remainder consisted of 2,000 New Mexican volunteers, 100 Colorado volunteers, and 500 militia. Kit Carson commanded the 1st Regiment of the New Mexican Volunteers. Sibley led his brigade to within 15 miles south of Fort Craig during the evening of February 13th. Judging the fort to be too strong to be taken by assault, Sibley deployed his brigade in a line for the next 3 days, hoping to lure the Federals into the open. But Canby, not trusting his volunteer troops, refused to attack. As they were down to a few days' rations, the Confederates could not wait indefinitely, so at a council of war on the 18th, Sibley ordered the army to cross the Rio Grande and move up the eastern side of the river to the fort near Valverde, 6 miles north of Fort Craig. His hope was to cut the Union communications between the fort and their headquarters in Santa Fe. By the 20th, the Confederate Army, under the cover of the hills between it and the river, was opposite Fort Craig. Confederate Colonel Thomas Greene attempted to place artillery on the heights overlooking the river and fort. However, Canby had anticipated the move, forcing the Texans to make a dry camp on the night of the 20th. About midnight, Union Captain James Creighton tried to blow up a few rebel picket posts by sending mules loaded with barrels of fused gunpowder into the Confederate lines. But the faithful old Army mules insisted on wandering back toward the Union camp before blowing to bits. Although the only casualties were 2 mules, The explosion stampeded a herd of Confederate beef cattle and horses into the Union's lines, so depriving Greene's troops of some much-needed provisions and horses. The next morning, February 21st, Sibley sent an advance party consisting of 4 companies of the 2nd Texas Mounted Rifles under the command of Major Charles Pyron to scout ahead to the Valverde Ford, with the 4th Texas Mounted Rifles under Lieutenant Colonel William Reed Scurry following close behind. The rest of the brigade remained in camp intending to follow later. Union scouts informed Canby of the Confederate movements towards the north. Canby then sent a mixed force of infantry, cavalry, and artillery to the ford under the command of Colonel Benjamin S. Roberts of the 5th New Mexico Infantry. The infantry and artillery slowed the column down, so Roberts sent Major Thomas Duncan ahead with the cavalry to secure the ford. Following Roberts' departure, Canby sent additional reinforcements from the fort's garrison and assigned several companies of the New Mexico Volunteers to watch the movements of the enemy, threaten his flanks and rear, and impede his movements as much as possible. When the Confederates under Pyron arrived at the eastern side of the Valverde Ford, they found that the Union forces were already there, blocking their passage. Pyron sent for reinforcements from the Fort Texas while his men took cover in an old riverbed, which served as an excellent defensive position. At first, despite having a numerical advantage, the Union cavalry deployed in a skirmish line instead of trying to drive the Confederates out of their position. This forced the Union artillery to remain on the western bank of the Rio Grande. When Scurry arrived, he deployed his regiment to Pyron's right, with the regimental artillery on the Confederate left. Although they had gained a numerical superiority, the Confederates were mostly armed with short-range shotguns and pistols, which couldn't reach the Union positions 300 yards away. The Confederate howitzers also couldn't reach the Union artillery on the far bank of the river. Meanwhile, Canby ordered most of the remaining garrison at Fort Gregg to march to Valverde, leaving behind some militia to guard the fort. When he arrived, Canby moved most of his command, including the artillery, to the eastern bank, leaving the 1st New Mexico Volunteers under Carson and the 2nd New Mexico Volunteers under Colonel Miguel Pino on the western bank as a reserve. By early afternoon, the remainder of the Confederate force, the 5th Texas Mounted Rifles under Colonel Thomas Greene and a battalion of the 7th Texas Mounted Rifles under Lieutenant Colonel John Sutton, arrived at the battlefield, much in need of water and denied access to the river by the defending Union forces. Sibley, who during the morning had remained with the wagons, relinquished command of the brigade and Greene took over, who then handed command of the 5th Texas over to Major Samuel Lockridge. Around 2:00 p.m., Greene authorized a Lancer company to attempt a charge on what they thought was an inexperienced New Mexico company on the Union extreme right. However, the Union soldiers turned out to be a Colorado company, which was able to defeat the charge without breaking. 20 of the Lancers were killed and wounded during the charge, with almost all the horses disabled or killed as well. When it returned to the Confederate line, the Lancer Company rearmed itself with pistols and shotguns and continued fighting the battle. This was the first and last Lancer charge of the American Civil War. By 4:00 p.m., the Union appeared to have the advantage in battle. Canby decided that a massive frontal assault would fail, and instead decided to attack the Confederate left. To do so, he ordered one of his batteries on his right to redeploy closer to the Confederate line, and moved several companies to his right, including Carson's 1st New Mexico Regiment, which crossed the river and took its place in line. However, this repositioning of the troops weakened the center of the Union line and the battery on Canby's left. Hoping to stall the Union attack, Greene ordered Major Henry Roquette to attack the Union right with his battalion. This attack was repulsed by frontal fire and a flank attack from the 1st New Mexico, and the Union right advanced after the retreating Confederates. At this time, Greene ordered the Confederate right wing under the command of Scurry to charge the Union center and the battery on its left. The attack force of 750 men was arranged in 3 successive waves. The motivation of the Confederates was their desperate need for water, which could only be reached by dislodging the Union troops blocking the access to the Rio Grande. The shock of the Confederate charge caused over half of the battery's supporting force to rout. Lockridge was mortally wounded during the attack. The Federals countered with a cavalry charge, but the main Confederate force continued to press their assault on Canby's left flank, capturing 6 artillery pieces and breaking the Union battle line, which soon turned into a panic-stricken retreat of both regular troops and New Mexico volunteers. Sibley was about to order another attack when Canby sent a white flag asking for a truce to remove the bodies of the dead and wounded, to which Sibley gentlemanly agreed. Canby managed to reorganize his men, minus about 200 deserters from among the New Mexico volunteers, in order to retreat back to Fort Craig, leaving the road northward towards Santa Fe open to the Confederates. Left in possession of the battlefield, the Confederates gained the victory but had suffered substantial casualties, reporting 36 killed, 150 wounded, and 1 missing out of 2,590 men. Due to the strength of the fort's walls, Sibley decided to abandon his attempt to capture the fort and instead continue northwards towards Albuquerque and Santa Fe, where he hoped to capture much-needed supplies. However, he was severely hampered by the losses in horses and mules from the battle, which forced him to dismount the Fort Texas as infantry and destroy some of the supplies and wagons. Canby reported that his forces had 3 officers and 65 men killed, 3 officers and 157 men wounded, 1 officer and 35 men missing for a total of 264, suffering a 16% casualty rate. Considering himself to be outnumbered, he chose not to pursue Sibley, instead sending mounted detachments of New Mexico volunteers against the Confederates' rear for harassment. He would remain with the main body at Fort Craig to cut off the Confederate supply line and to intercept reinforcements for Sibley, eventually hoping to pin the Confederates between himself and Union reinforcements from Fort Union. After the Civil War ended, Fort Craig and the Valverde battlefield were left for the New Mexico plains to swallow up again. But despite its remoteness, there are multiple claims that the old battlefield is haunted by the spirits of the soldiers that died there. The investigation of the Valverde battlefield started with a simple email from someone who said he worked for the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railway as an engineer. While heading north, this gentleman claimed that he witnessed a full-on charge of what he thought was a reenactment group practicing, considering there was no audience. He didn't find out until later that reenactments are never performed at Valverde, and considering that ranch hands patrol the area, what this man saw could not have been anyone living. Since this sounded intriguing, we decided to proceed with an investigation. However, several issues soon became apparent. The first is that floods in 1896 and 1929 have dramatically altered the landscape. We had to determine exactly where the battlefield is. By comparing maps made by Canby in his after-action report and topographic maps from 1937 and 1948, we were able to do this. But the major problem was that the witness's description of the area did not match the area around the battlefield itself. He specifically said that he passed through an area where trees lined both sides of the tracks. He saw the Civil War soldiers on his right and also noted that irrigation ditches were also on both sides of the tracks. All of these features are not present near the area of the battlefield. Since the simplest explanation would be that the engineer actually did see reenactors, we expanded the area of our search. Just north of Socorro lies Escondido Lake, where reenactions of the Battle of Valverde are held annually. When we searched the area where the railroad tracks were, we found the landmarks described by the witness. Since the location of the battlefield is not well known, it is completely possible that the engineer had mistaken its location and actually did see reenactors. Just when we thought the case was solved, we received another claim. A ranch hand, riding near the battlefield, had reported that a Confederate soldier had taken a shot at him with a musket while he was searching for a lost calf. This led to 6 investigations starting in 2001. However, by 2009, these investigations had not yielded anything conclusive. We needed more details on the event that the ranch hand had reported. After a series of interviews with the witness, the team headed out to the area where the Confederate soldier was seen to test an alternative hypothesis.
Okay, so the river today is pretty much here. Okay. The river during their time dipped kind of in a V, All right, so where we would be now is more towards this end of the battlefield, the north end.
Well, and that's right where the Texans were mustering, right? So it would make sense if there was a sentry or something in the woods hiding from there.
Right, so the mesa would be here, and so this would have been where the main thrust came from that took out McRae's cannons, right. And the Lancer charge would have launched from somewhere around here too.
Although the location may be accurate, did the ranch hand really see the ghost of a Confederate soldier, or was it something else?
I think the simplest explanation is that it was a hunter, but we're going to test that theory right now.
Okay, so the way that we're going to do this is we have 0 in the position of where the shooter was. So what we're going to do is we're going to time 4 seconds. The reason for the 4 seconds is that's how long he lost sight of the guy when he was dismounting from the horse and checking that area. So he has basically 4 seconds to get out of view. If this is a person, he has to hide within 4 seconds. So we'll actually turn around and give him the 4 seconds, and if we can still see him, well, that blows that. But if it's still visible, then that guy should have seen him. He actually walked up there, so
all right.
We'll see.
Ready, set, go! Stop!
Okay, Carl, come on out. I can't see him.
No,
he was laying down.
He was able to get over there with a big rifle.
Yeah, and if the guy didn't go into the woods, I mean, he could have been laying in there, for all he knew. If he was really, if it was a hunter that accidentally shot at him and didn't want to get caught, he could have done the exact same thing.
And the horses, I've been riding since I was little, and horses freak out at all kinds of noises. And wind gets them, so if something cracks, they're gonna, it takes a lot to kind of stop them, and then you get off, the horse is still gonna be freaked out.
Right. That doesn't look good for our witness testimony. That's plenty of time. And we're on federal land. If you are shooting and illegally hunting, that would be a reason to run. Yeah.
Especially if you shot at somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're talking about some good time in your place.
Yeah.
All right, why would somebody come out here on federal land knowing the kind of trouble they can get into and shoot a gun? And he'd have to know what he's shooting at, because the guy on a horse is big as life on here. Right here in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
No.
You didn't see that guy with the gun, the rifle and the fishing pole on the tracks.
And that's a good point. And
So,
this is all federal land, right?
Yeah,
so you have to know he was breaking the law there.
Well, yeah, and in fact, there is an actual hunting season for black powder only. So it wouldn't be unusual for someone to have a black
Do
powder
they
gun.
have to come and get a permit?
They're supposed to have a
Yeah.
permit, yeah.
And so they'd have to get the permit and come check it out.
Yeah.
So they could be here legally with that.
What is that?
Well, no, I don't think you could hunt legally here on this land.
Property?
No.
But where we saw that other guy?
Where that other guy is BLM.
Okay, so he could be
I
there.
don't think they're supposed to be hunting. I think fish, but I don't think they can.
Yeah, I
hunt.
don't think he was hunting. I think he was fishing and just had the rifle
That's
along
why the guy
for
got
whatever
Had it for
reason.
protection,
Yeah.
But it's like when we first interviewed him. That's the first thing he thought in his mind was it was a poacher. And then after he didn't see the guy, he said, "Okay, I'm just going to get out of here." Because I asked him, are you worried about him shooting again? Well, it's a black powder gun. I knew it takes a while to reload.
Yeah.
So after he didn't see him, he left. And then it's after the fact that he was told, okay, that was the battlefield and that was the anniversary of the battle. Then he said, well, he was wearing a gray coat, therefore this must be a Confederate soldier. And you see how he's putting two and two together.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm thinking. The psychological factor. You get shot at, you go home and you're thinking about that. You're trying to figure out why somebody would be shooting at you, kind of freaked out. And then somebody says, oh, yeah, no, dude, I heard this place was haunted. It's the anniversary. Did you know that? And then he goes into his mind, oh, well, that's what it was. It's an easy go-to thing for somebody. I've got a story for you on this one. I was out there riding my horse. This is what happened to me.
Yeah, rationalization. And then Carl showed it's easy for someone to hide
Yeah.
relatively quickly. So.
And he doesn't know for sure how long he was getting off that horse.
Yeah, that's an estimate.
Easy
3 to 4 seconds is his
yeah.
guess of how long it took. We don't know. But the point is someone was able to hide, so that is an alternative explanation we have to consider when we're looking at when it's all said and done. So.
Did he report it to anybody else, police or anybody?
Afraid to ridicule.
Yeah.
We had to badger him just to get the story out of him. He's from Texas, and he's like, oh, you're Ken, or looking you up on the battlefield. I mean, he's really afraid of being made fun of.
Okay.
When we were doing 94 Rock and we wanted to talk about the battle, he refused to even to go on air,
somebody
even to
shot
say his
me.
name.
I'm on my phone when I have reception. Yeah.
Okay, so what we need to do next, we're going to have 2 observation points. So let's deal with the next claim, the guns of Valverde. People hear cannon fire out here at night on the anniversary of the battle. So we're going to have, we'll have 2 teams deployed. We'll put one somewhere around this area. The other one will be back around on the south side of the battlefield.
Okay.
After confirming the alternative hypothesis for the Confederate soldier, we split into 2 teams to examine the claims of cannon fire that is supposedly heard on the anniversary of the battle. One team remained on the northeast side of the battlefield, while the other went to the far southwestern boundary where the Union battery was positioned during the battle.
So basically, we're going to be listening for cannon fire. That's what's reported on the anniversary. So anything that sounds like that, we're going to try and record if we hear it. So that's what we're going to be paying attention to.
Okay, so basically I'm just going to set up some recording equipment in case we do hear anything sounds like cannon fire, so we can record the noise, and then we can actually compare that to cannons later on to see if it's that or something else. And of course the direction is going to be important. The railroad tracks are this way, and I don't know, maybe there's noises coming from the railroad that people are hearing, so we'll keep that on standby.
So right now we're moving down towards the mesa, and this is the location of where Hall had his 24 pounders on the Union side of the line. The other team is closer to McRae's cannon, so the idea here was no matter which supposed cannon fired on what location of the battlefield, we'd be able to ascertain what direction it's coming from. If it is indeed some sort of phantom cannon fire.
Jerry, the river doesn't hardly make any noise.
I know. It's very quiet out here.
It's not a very fast current and doesn't seem to be anything floating in it. So I was thinking again, maybe stuff is crashing into other things by floating down the river. Big logs or...
See, because the old riverbank is back that way, so they were anchored against this. So man, they were literally, their line was coming like right through here, really close. Not maybe not exactly here, but it's close. It's a daytime shot.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely quiet. I'm not seeing no dead guys walking around. I'm not hearing no cows.
all we've heard so far was just the one, tree that was shifting a little bit, which we don't think is what Blue was saying, but that's all we were able to hear when we stopped.
It sounded like, when 2 dogs are getting ready to play, they make a little growling noise when they're getting playful and stuff, like rawr. That's what it sounded like.
Like a low growl.
Yeah.
I'd just like to point out here that I definitely heard what Blue said she was hearing. It is kind of creepy. It does sound kind of like a low moan. But more than that, it sounds like in the distance, definitely some echo of a dirt bike or some other grunt. I mean, it could even be like a cow grunting or something that's just loud enough to travel this way. Definitely an interesting noise, but I wouldn't think too much about it being more than just something in the distance traveling through. As quiet as everything else is, something's got to be carried in on the wind. Oh, and that was definitely a car I just heard.
Okay, we've just finished with our observations at our area, and we have nothing at all to report. There was nothing that sounded anything remotely like a cannon, although we did discover that sounds can travel for extremely long distances in this area. We were hearing the sounds of cars and vehicles on the interstate, and the interstate's 2 miles away. So if there was any kind of a sound, like a hunter's rifle or anything like that, it would travel for an enormous distance. So it's really kind of not looking good for the myth. We're hoping that Team 2 had something more interesting happening, so we're on our way over to where they're at. But it's extremely doubtful, as we probably would have heard it too. Well, we'll see when we get there.
You're growling?
Oh yeah. It was, like she said, I stopped to let you guys go ahead so I could just listen for a minute. And it was definitely, almost, if you want to let your imagination go, a little moanish. But like she said, it really sounded like the base of the throat of like an animal starting to growl a little bit or something. It also sounded pretty far away. Could have been a dirt bike or a motorcycle, and then not very long after that, I could hear a car.
So we were here listening. This was second listening position. We were listening for the cannon fire. Didn't hear anything. We had one person, Holly, said that she thought she heard a rumble, so we marked that on the tape, and we'll have to play that back later and look at it. The thing we did see is some strange flashes and lights in the trees around us. They were all white lights, somewhat diffuse, and they would vary in height from about 3 feet up to about 7 or 8 feet. Multiple people would see them at the same time, so we don't think it was a trick of our eyes in the half-light, but that's about what we saw here.
Was there anything else that happened around the same time? Was there ever a noise, or was there anything else odd happening?
No, not that anybody noted. It seemed like they were just random flashes in the bushes mainly, and in the trees.
Anything to add to that, or?
No? Greg pretty much summed it all up.
Earl, anything else happen that you saw? Anything to add?
Wendy and I went further down the trail, and we would both see the same lights at the same time in the same spot. And the closer we got to the river, the less frequent it seemed that the lights became. So it seemed that from this area that we're at now, looking towards the river, is where you would see them. And again, it was sporadic. The heights varied between 3 and 8 feet, and it was always in a bushy area inside the tree lines.
But about how big was the actual light itself? Was it a ball shape, or was it just weird flashes?
Well, it varied, because I saw one flash that was almost like lightning it kind of diffused through the trees, and you could see the trees through it. And then I saw the little lights, and they were just small, but they were a flash. They would just flash.
And then disappear?
And disappear.
About how big, do you think? Like around? Show with your hands if you need to.
I don't know. I mean, from this distance, they looked probably like pin lights. Small, but bright.
We believe that the Phantom Cavalry charge is explainable. The witness misidentified the location of the battlefield and actually saw reenactors near Escondido Lake. The second claim of a Confederate soldier shooting a musket at a ranch hand is improbable. Alternative explanations for this event were tested and confirmed. As such, there is no veridical evidence to suggest that it was paranormal in origin. The sounds of phantom cannon fire is also improbable. Neither team heard anything that resembled the sound of a cannon. We also discovered that in this area sounds can travel for long distances. This provides multiple alternative explanations for the reported phenomenon that cannot be disproven. The light phenomenon seen by Team 2 are still mysterious, although future tests have to be done to rule out an optic phenomenon. At this time, there is not any sufficient evidence to suggest that the battlefield is haunted.